recording. This recording will be available on our Fall Academy webpage for folks who were unable to attend today. And so team, just checking back in that we're recording. All right. All right. And so for anyone who is just joining, welcome to our Fall 2025 Expanded Learning Academy. We're focusing today on nuts and bolts, the latest updates supporting quality expanded learning. I think this is version 7 or 6 of nuts and bolts that the team have facilitated throughout our academy journey. And so really, y'all are in for a treat today. And before we introduce our speakers, I just have a few slides to go over. Today's agenda, as I mentioned, we have a full workshop that will be facilitated by the California After School Network and the California Department of Ed Expanded Learning Division. We'll offer some closing comments around 11:25, and then we will open up interactive breakout sessions where all of you will be able to jump into a breakout and dive a little deeper on different content that was lifted in today's workshop. So it's a great opportunity to learn a little bit more, access resources, maybe chat with colleagues, share some promising practices, etc. And then our Zoom workshop will end at 12 o'clock today for today, and we hope that you can join us on Thursday for our next workshop. We consider our academy workshops to be a shared learning space, and so in a moment, if it hasn't already been dropped, we will be sharing a learning guide, which is it will force copy, so that way you have your own copy to access resources. It also includes a PDF of today's presentation. And it also has space for you to take notes. So there's some reflection prompts in there, so that way you can drop in some key things that you might be hearing that you may want to start implementing, or some reminders. This is just to help guide you with your learning experience for today. And then I mentioned that the PDF presentation is linked in that learning guide and will also be added to our webpage, as well as being emailed to all of our participants after our workshop today. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to introduce you all to Heather Williams, our Director of Policy and Outreach with the California After School Network, and Michael Funk, our Director from the Expanded Learning Division. Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Melissa. Good morning, everyone. Great to be here with y'all. And yeah, we're going to just dive in because we have a lot of content that we're going to be covering, and really appreciate all the folks from the Expanded Learning Division that are joining us today and going to go over some key topics. So what we're covering today, some expanded learning basics, and some of you probably have heard this several times by now, and that's okay. You know, they say it takes 7 times to hear something before you're like actually register it. And honestly, I think sometimes it takes more than 7 times. So maybe you'll learn something new. And for those of you who haven't heard it before, hopefully it will be helpful. We'll cover some policy updates, just some things that have happened in the last few months that will be impacting our programs this school year and potentially beyond. And then some specific updates on CALPADS reporting. We know this is top of mind for a lot of our programs. And then Teng and Iqbal will be sharing an update about audits. So there's been a lot of activity there. So they'll be sharing some key findings and resources and information with you all. And then lastly, Lindsey and Jen will be talking about just briefly attendance recovery. They're not going to go over all of it, but there's been some updates there. And so we'll share some resources. If you're new to attendance recovery, you can access some additional resources as well. And then, as Melissa said, we'll go into our breakouts at the end so we can dig into those topics a little bit more. And as always, like, this is a quick 2 hours. We have almost 200 people on here already. So we do this as a meeting format, not a webinar format, because we do try to make it interactive. But with that many folks in that little time, right, we're not going to be able to answer everyone's questions or get to all of the things that you are wondering about. So other opportunities to engage is to join us for office hours. That's a really great space that's directed by the participants that show up. Make sure you cover the latest FAQs. Those are being updated regularly, so you'll want to access those. You can always reach out to the CDE help desk. Very importantly is to engage with your system of support regional team. And so that's important for adding your local context on top of the state context. So everything we share in these academies is really the state level context, but your regional teams will understand a lot of the nuances at the local level. And so those are it's a really good resource and place to engage. And then lastly, watch fireside chats. I know it's been a minute since we've had fireside chats, but Michael and I have one scheduled. So hopefully we will be releasing a fireside chat soon. So be on the lookout for that. All right. So we're gonna jump in. So I'm gonna turn it over to Michael Funk, our director of the Expanding Learning Division at CDE. And he's just gonna talk about like, what is expanded learning? Michael, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Heather. Welcome, everyone. Yeah, it's been a while since we've had a fireside chat, and to be honest, we had several scheduled, and then some development would happen in either federally or statewide, and we knew we had to pause. So we're going to bring those back. One of the things that has been obvious over the last 6 to 12 months from a variety of reasons is that we really need to assume that not everybody knows the basics about expanded learning. You know, there are hundreds, hundreds and hundreds of districts that are now charged with expanded learning programs to operate that haven't done so before. And for those of us that have been doing this for decades, or even a few years, some of the information I might cover next might seem basic, but this is nuts and bolts. And we're going to move fairly quickly through this and get into the more recent developments in terms of policy and budget. And so bear with me here, but what is expanded learning in California? I think many of us know, but some don't know, that California has the largest and one of the highest rated systems of school-based and school-linked expanded learning programs. So most people most families with kids refer these to as before school programs, after school programs, summer programs, spring break programs. And we do the same when we're talking to those people. But when we're talking to educators, we made the shift many, many years ago to use the term expanded learning. And the reason we use that term is because the school day folks oftentimes would talk about extended learning. And we wanted to differentiate that. We'll talk a bit more about what that means. But just know that the expanded learning system in California, pre-pandemic, before COVID, had over 4,500 sites, 980,000 students, primarily funded by the state. And the state funding at that time was more than all 49 states combined times 3. And we'll talk more about that, get into the specifics about why that was the envy of the country then and why we're so far beyond where that was. So next slide, please. When we talk about after-school programs, for those that have never operated an expanded learning program as we define it, how does it differentiate from just other stuff that happens after school? You know, sports, clubs. And I think here, I'm not going to go through all of this slide, but you'll have these slides for your reference to go through. But they're regular structured or semi-structured programs with the goal of providing youth with a safe, supervised environment, with expanded learning programs providing educational and developmental enrichment that addresses the needs of the whole child and helps promote success in school and life. For many people, they think of after school as care. In fact, many times my kids have been invited, we've been invited to enroll in aftercare programs. And there's care is an important term. It implies kids are engaged, they belong, they are loved, and they are cared for, which is all very important. But the expanded learning program does expand learning. Let's talk more about that, Heather. Okay, we've already talked about this, but let me click to the far right on the how. These programs should be hands-on. That means kids doing things with their hands, not just being at a desk doing academic worksheets or busy sheets. Engaging. Engagement is kids get to do things they care about. That's engagement. Not just kids, sometimes we think kids when they're laughing and busy, that could also just be entertaining. But engagement goes much deeper. Engagement might even look quieter than recess, but engagement means kids care about what they're doing. Student-centered, results-driven. Really important point here, include community partners. As we've been working more and more closely with the Community Schools Initiative, we know, for those of us that have been in this work for decades, that what is being emphasized in the community school movement is in fact what is emphasized in expanded learning. It's the fact to recognize that our programs sit in an entire community and our community partners often engage and employ community educators from that neighborhood that have connections and look like the kids. And they complement, not replicate, what's happening during the school day. Next slide, please. So we do have quality standards, and this emerged back in 2014 in the early days when I had been first came to the California Department of Education. We engaged the field and said, we have to really define what quality looks like. But we want to make sure that's based on some things we know, and that's one of them is the positive youth development framework. And just if you don't know what that is, write that phrase down, look it up, positive youth development framework. But it basically comes from the perspective that our young people are assets. They have assets. We focus on their assets, not their deficits. And if we provide our students with the proper supports and the proper opportunities, the proper relationships, that they will thrive into the best version of themselves. And that's some of the foundation for these quality standards. Next slide, please. Not hard to understand when you see point of service, if you know the youth development framework or you're familiar with the learning and after school and summer principles. On the left, point of service, safe and supportive environment, active and engaged learning, skill building, youth voice and leadership. I'm not going to read the list for you. What we have discovered, we thought we introduced this in 2014. Everybody knows about it. If you fill out an application for ACES, after school education safety program funding, if you fill out an application for federal 21st century community learning center funding, if you fill out a work plan for the expanded learning opportunities program, you are writing to these point of service and programmatic standards. These are the questions that you are asked to write to. And to help you out, if you look at the quality standards document, go ahead and back up one more, Heather. If you go to this document, you'll not only see a description of what each standard looks like, but you'll see a whole description of what it looks like when it's being done properly. Here's what students experience when youth voice and leadership is emphasized. Here's what the programmatic elements look like. Here's what staff do. So a great resource, and we're finding that, again, a lot of people aren't really deeply familiar with this. So we're going back to the basics, back to the fundamentals. Next slide, 2 slides. And you'll hear some reference to this in some other parts of today, but we do have a system of support for expanded learning. We have a robust, intentional system of humans that are here to help support you. And it's a partnership between my staff at the California Department of Education, 16 different county offices of education that we fund, and their staff, and 2 statewide technical assistance partners, the California After School Network and ASAP Connect. I'm not going to go through the map with you, but just so you're, where does this map come from and where are those numbers from? So this is the map of the County Superintendents Association regions, which is for all of K-12 education. And some of those regions chose to have multiple counties funded, and some regions chose to have one county funded as part of our system of support. So that's what that map is. We do have a robust system of support, and later on you'll hear more about that. And Heather just put a great link in the chat for you to discover more. Next slide. And finally, our State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurman. These are his priorities, his initiatives for transforming California schools. And universal meals, universal kindergarten, community schools, professional learning, anti-bias education, mental health programs, and expanded learning programs. For those of us that have been in the field a long time, we're finding expanded learning in a much more prominent spotlight than it's been historically. And there are opportunities to partner and have meaningful relationships and leverage. One of the reasons we're using the term ecosystem is that we're part of this whole. We're not like a little program over here in the corner that's an afterthought, which could have been how we described ourselves 20 years ago. But we are a vital part of California education. So that's the nuts and that's the basics of what expanded learning is in California. And Heather, I'll pass it to you.
Thanks, Michael. And I'm going to go through this next section a little bit quickly so we can get to the policy updates. And just noting, right, like you have access to these slides. So if you're like, wait, what did she say? You can go back and look at them. You can go back and watch the recording afterwards. But really important here, we're talking about funding. So it says expanded learning funding, not expanded learning programs, because these are funding sources. And so we get a lot of like, oh, ELOP, and especially for a lot of our new folks, like, oh, ELOP is expanded learning. And it is, but it is a funding source for expanded learning. And it is one of 3 in California in terms of funding sources that are specifically dedicated to expanded learning. And so we also have ACEs, and we also have 21st Century, which includes both our elementary and middle programs or funding sources and our high school programs that we also refer to as assets. And so we have a long history on the next slide. This, I'm definitely not walking through all of this, but this gives you a little bit of the history of how 21st Century was initiated in 1994. California funding was established in 1998. In 2006, Prop 49, which a lot of folks know who've been around for a while, is the proposition that Schwarzenegger really advocated for. That's really what established ACEs, and the 550 million was triggered in 2006. And so that's really when expanded learning started to get recognition in California. There was a lot of funding throughout the state for it. And then COVID hit, 2021, ELOP announced. And so our kind of little bubble of after school turning expanded learning now became this statewide funding source that literally almost every single district in the state. So on the next slide, almost every single district received this funding. It's a new ongoing funding source for expanded learning programs. So again, note the language here is really intentional. Funding source for programs. ACES 21st Century and ELOP should be used together to offer a single comprehensive program. This is on multiple slides, and we really want to reiterate this because we hear like, oh, our ELOP kids and our ACES kids, and no, these are our expanded learning kids. And so as we get to other things, it's really important to think about how you're using these funding sources for a single comprehensive program. And then just noting ELOP is an apportionment, which is different than our other funding sources. And so it has some different rules and guidelines attached to it that impact things. And so, for example, the intent for ELOP funding is to offer all students access, but prioritizing unduplicated students. If you are new to that language, when we say unduplicated students or pupils, we're referring to English learners, FRPM eligible youth, or foster youth. Next slide. And this gives you just a rough example or a rough estimate of where we are at with funding. So a total of 5.4 billion. So you can see ELOP is by and large the largest funding source, but we have almost $1 billion when you combine ACES and 21st Century. So that is also a significant amount of funding. And then on the next slide, you can see kind of how our funding has grown. And so just pointing out, when you look at fiscal year 2021, when Michael was saying that amount of funding, when you looked at every other state times 3 and we had more money, that was fiscal year 2021. So put that into context of where we are in fiscal year 25, 26. We are really fortunate with the amount of funding that's invested in California. Next slide. And this just, again, kind of walks through the funding sources in a slightly different way. So you can see what's federal funding, what's state funding, some important information in terms of like what grades that they serve. There's a bunch of asterisks because there's things to know. For example, ELOP is prioritized for TK through 6, but can definitely be used to serve students in 7th through 12th grade once you meet the minimum requirements. And then again, right, some of our funding is competitive applications, some is formula-based apportionments, some is site-based awards, some is distributed to LEAs. So even though we talk about one comprehensive program, there's obviously a lot of the background, right, the technical side, the logistical side, there's different things you'll have to manage, different reporting requirements, but forward facing, regardless of how you're using these funding sources, students should experience one comprehensive program. Next slide. So that's just to give you, again, a little reminder of like how our programs are funded. So now we're going to transition into policy updates. And again, I'm going to go through some of these quickly. Some of them I'll spend a few extra minutes on. The major headline, and this is focused on state policy updates. There has been stuff happening at the federal level, and if you all want to get into that, there will be a breakout room later that you can kind of dig into that. But for here, we're really focusing on state policy updates. So budget impacts on expanded learning, and this was the initial amount in the budget process was increasing ongoing funding for ELOP by 525.5 million to cover a couple changes. I'll talk about that in a moment. And then to maintain the existing reimbursement rates for ACES and 21st Century. I definitely recommend signing up for our policy newsletter and updates. We go into the weeds of like what's happening with the California budget and how that impacts programs. So that's a good resource. But we'll go to the next slide. And So just flagging again, I already shared this slide, but what I wanted to add is that once the budget process goes through, right, they have to have a budget in place by July 1st in California. But there's always cleanup. There's always things that happen. And so the legislature has to go back and do cleanup. And so they call them budget bill cleanup or budget cleanup bills. And one of the cleanup bills that's really important for our field is SB 105. It has a number of items in it, but as of yesterday, when I checked, it still was in there. It proposes an additional $81 million in funding, which would bring the total actually to over 4.6 billion. And this is important, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But let's go to the next slide. So remember that. So a couple things. So there's the budget bill, which is literally like the dollars that are in the budget. And then there are trailer bills. And the trailer bills offer changes to Ed code to clean up law so that the budget actually can be enacted. And so there's usually a K-12 or high, like K-12 budget trailer bill, as well as a number of other trailer bills. If you really want to go read through it, it's really lengthy, but AB 121 was the budget trailer bill that was signed into law. And that should say June 27th, 2025. We're not in the future yet. So we'll update that typo. But it did a few key things for Expanded Learning Opportunities Program funding source. So beginning this school year, ELOP is organized into two rates. And so rate 1 was set at 75% unduplicated pupil population. That dropped down to 55%. It also outlined the intent for rate 2 to be no less than 1,575. And that was actually in a separate assembly bill. And I'll talk about that in a moment. It increased the minimum apportionment amount for this fiscal year, beginning this fiscal year from 50,000 to 100,000. Some of that additional funding in ELOP is to cover the increase in the apportionment amount. It offered some additional language to clarify what offer access means. It didn't change the meaning, it was just providing some additional language. And then it added some additional audit information for rate 1, and I'll talk about that briefly in a moment. So next slide. So a lot of information on this slide. What's really important is if you go down to the bottom, fiscal year 25-26 rates. The intent was for rate 2 to be no less than 1,575. With the funding that was available, it was set at $1,280.21, and that's a really long number. So SB 105 that I mentioned a couple slides ago proposes an additional $81 million in funding for ELOP. So it is our understanding that if that passes, that would help bring the rate 2 up to that intended amount of 1,575. And this also covers like what are the requirements for offer and provide access for the different rates. So this is a handy slide just to remember what the difference are between the two rates for ELOP. And then our next slide. So again, there's some audit requirements that change. So this is what is in the trailer bill. Unless you are an expert at reading Ed code, you might be like, what does that say? So on the next slide, we have translated this for you. So that's, highlights what all of this is referring to. And so one more slide. I'm not going to make you all read that. So beginning this year, if an LEA was receiving funding at rate 2 in the prior year and now has been bumped up to rate 1 in the current fiscal year, this year they are subject to audit compliance for rate 2 requirements. And then each year after, they are subject to audit compliance with rate 1 requirements. So if you suddenly went from rate 2 to rate 1, right, there is different requirements. You will be audited at the lower requirements this year, and in the following year, you'll be audited at the higher requirements. So that basically gives you a grace period to ramp up to the higher requirements. And then also attendance recovery is happening. So a lot of folks have been likely tracking attendance recovery. As I said, Jen and Lindsey will be jumping into the latest updates in terms of resource, the FAQs for ELOP, but there is a number of resources. So if you're like, I don't even understand what attendance recovery is, or how it works, I would recommend checking out these resources. We had an academy in the spring that was spent the whole academy on this topic. There's a lot of CDE guidance and resources. So if you click on that, it'll direct you to the different resources. So I think that's it for our policy updates. And before we talk about CalPADS, just Michael, turning it over to you for anything I've
Yeah, thanks, Heather, for all that information. And again, you'll all have access to this or have access to this in the PDF. You can go back over it. But two things I just want to highlight. It's interesting that in the scale of what expand learning has grown to, we see, oh, they just added $81 million to make this little correction. I just want to emphasize the significance of that. I just read yesterday that was it Alabama or Arkansas that had a big victory for state after-school funding. And a couple of years ago, they got $1.5 million in the budget to test it out. And now it's up to like 12 or $14 million. California in 1997 had a legislative victory to establish the first state funding for after school, which was actually first funded in 1998. And that was $50 million. And that was a big deal. This past year, Michigan had a landmark victory to get their first robust amount of state funding. So Michigan, $50 million. So I don't want us to lose sight of what $80 million means. It's a lot of money. You know, I sometimes watch the news and they talk about this big, massive construction project around Sacramento, like renovating Highway 50, which is taking years and years and years and years. And it's a nearly $300 million project. And I think, wow, we really have a lot of money to support kids. And the reason I mention that is let's not forget to be good stewards of that responsibility. It's a lot of money, and our kids deserve it. And we have to do our best to provide the highest quality. The second thing I just want to highlight is this notion that I talked to a lot of people who, when they heard that the percentages for tier one funding, which is 2,750, was going to drop to 55% on duplicated students. It wasn't great news for them because now how am I going to find staff to offer and provide access to all of my students? So I think it's really significant that all those charts and graphs and all those colors, it can be so confusing when you look at ed code. So that table that Heather put in the slide deck is really important, that you've got a year to work on it. And what I would say to you, please, if you've got a year to work on it, don't try to do it alone. We're here to help you. We're here to be thought partners. We're here to walk with you through it. And so many people have retreated off to a windowless conference room and try to come up with a plan on their own. And going from tier two to tier one funding, it's a big jump. And let's do it together. So Heather, back to you.
Thanks, Michael. All right. Now we're going to be talking about CalPADS. So this is, and again, this, and we'll share the link in just a moment. There was a pretty lengthy academy on this in the spring, and so we're not going to spend a ton of time on it, but we've been noticing in office hours some questions, and so just want to give you all some basics of what's going on with CalPADS, and of course, if you do have some questions, Michael and I will be in a breakout room a little bit later, and so wanted to just start with, for those folks that have been in expanded learning for a while, if you're like, yeah, we're familiar with reporting, right? You might be familiar with ASSIST, which is for 21st century, and ACES. That's actually a grant management system, and it's used for communications, fiscal compliance, reductions, identifying technical assistance. You can see the data points there that are collected. And then in addition to ASSIST, there's the annual outcomes based data, AOBD, that's used for evaluation purposes. Again, that's only for 21st century, and ACES, that collects information like attendance, student identifier numbers, and evidence of CQI process. And so something that is new this year, on our next slide, is CalPADS. And so ASSIST and AOBD are managed by the Expanded Learning Division. CalPADS is actually a CDE system that is managed by a different division and collects information statewide. And so this is going to be not just for 21st century and ACES, but it will also include ELOP. It is a data collection system that supports numerous state reporting requirements, and we'll get into exactly what it's collecting in just a moment. One note is there's also additional reporting requirements from the U.S. Department of Education for 21st century programs. So if you're like, wait, I have to submit something else, you do. We're not going to talk about that here. This is focused on what the state requires. So if we go to the next slide, I also want to flag there's some other annual reporting requirements for ELOP. And a reminder, ELOP is an apportionment, not a grant. And so there's different types of reporting. Expenditure reports, you are all likely getting emails right now to remind you to submit those. So those are important. But those reports have been really to collect information around expenditures and just some basics required by the legislature. But we want to talk about CalPADS because this is collecting some really important information. So this CalPADS collection came around because of AB 1113. On the next slide, this was a bill signed into law in 2024. And basically, it's to help assess our progress towards this goal of improving outcomes and describing the state's investment in the goal of basically universal access to expanded learning. The bill, so it's been signed into law, and it requires CDE to collect in CalPADS beginning this academic year annual pupil enrollment and participation in any of the following expanded learning programs: ELOP, 21st century, including assets, and ACES. So that's really important. We keep hearing questions about, oh, if we don't have ELOP, do we have to do something with CalPADS? Yes, it's any of these programs. So next slide. This just is a reminder that we did, again, have this academy in the spring. So if you want to get way more into the weeds of this, definitely make sure to go check out those resources. But just want to highlight a couple key things about CalPADS, and then we'll move on. So what is CalPADS? California Longitudinal Pupil Achievement Data System. That's a mouthful, which is why we say CalPADS. It collects different types of data, and it's used to track students over time. It's used for a lot of the California School Dashboard. There's a lot of state and federal reporting requirements, et cetera. So this is a large system that the Department of Education uses for so many different things. So on the next slide, each LEA, so LEAs are responsible for interfacing with CalPADS, submitting data. if you are with an LEA, you have a LEA CalPADS administrator. If you don't know who they are, like put that on your to-do list to make sure you know who they are. If you are with a CBO, make sure you are talking to your LEA and that your LEA is talking to their CalPADS administrator, because a lot of times the questions that are coming up are things that actually need to be sorted out at the local level. And so CalPADS collects data from all of these sources. The one that is really important for expanded learning is the student information system. And again, you'll want to talk to your CalPADS administrator about that. On the next slide, and we'll drop the link in. So CalPADS, CDE releases these CalPADS update flashes that talk about how data should be collected for new programs. So number 305, and we'll drop the link in, that talks about both the requirements for expanded learning programs and then also attendance recovery starting. So there's some data collection that's required for that as well. So that flash will include both. But let's talk about really quickly, we just have a few slides. So it's 2 data points, right? And it's collected at the LEA level, not the school level. So it's the whole school district. So there's a new file called the LEAP file, and there's 2 different fields. The first one is basically, is the student enrolled in an expanded learning program? Enrolled is defined as any student whose parents or guardians signed an expanded learning program registration form. So are they enrolled? Yes, you put in the code. If they're not, you don't. And then the second data point is the number of days of participation, which could be from 0 to 365 for the year. So if we go to the next slide, just chatting a little bit more about this, at the end of the school year, LEAs will submit the total number of days the student participated in a program during the year. A lot of times they'll refer to attendance. I'm using the term participation because this is different than how attendance is tracked, for example, in assist. This isn't like which days did the student attend. It's a whole number, 0 to 365. And so if the student was enrolled but never participated a single day, it's 0. If they participated one day, it's 1, and so on. How you count one day, it could be, there's a lot, it's not specified, it's any amount of time. So they showed up for 5 minutes, got a snack and left. That's 1 day. They participated 2 hours. That's 1 day. They went to a before school program for an hour, after school program for an hour, 1 day. They went to an ACES program in the morning for an hour. They went to a comprehensive ELOP and 21st century program in the afternoon. That's 1 day. So this is where I think there's a lot of like hang up. But if your student participated in an expanded learning program during the day, that counts as 1 day. And then for how you're entering this is, again, a whole number between 0 to 365. And then lastly on this, just if you are a provider, again, you will need to be tracking, so like if you are a CBO, you'll need to be tracking your statewide student identifiers, and then the total number of days that the student participated, as I just explained, because you will be responsible for giving that information to your LEA so they can upload it into CalPADS. And so again, make sure you're having, if you're a CBO, community-based organization providing programs, make sure you're having those conversations already with your district. And then lastly, you can sign up to get CalPADS communications. So there is a listserv available for LEAs only. You have to be a verified LEA. If you are not signed up, this is a good resource. And then you can anybody can access the flashes that are sent out. Those are all posted on the CDE website. So I definitely recommend that. Michael, before we turn it over to Iqbal and Teng, anything you want to say about CalPADS? I feel like every Friday office hours stuff is popping up about this topic.
Well, similar to what I said at the end of your last section, Heather, is to recognize the significance of now being part of CalPADS. Because in the years I've been working at the state level, I never dreamed we would actually end up being part of expanded learning would get into CalPADS, and it unlocks it will provide a gold mine of data for research and evaluation, and just to explore. The CalPADS is such a rich data environment about every child. And now we'll be able to take a look at, why is that whole number important? Well, we'll be able to see what are the characteristics of students that have gone 60 days, 120 days, 4 days. And it'll just be a gold mine for a lot of people interested in research. There'll be no other data set like it anywhere. So I think it's going to be of interest to people around the world, and that's not an overstatement. Secondly, now to dramatically go to the other end of the spectrum, no one sits at a keyboard and enters stuff into CalPADS. These are systems that, unless, of course, I recognize there are LEAs that are a one school LEA with, in some parts of California, with 10 kids. Well, yeah, they have a CalPADS person, and they might sit at a keyboard and type things in. And it might also be the principal, and it might also be the bus driver. But most districts have a CalPADS person. The districts have a student information system that talks to CalPADS. So the district puts information into their student information system, and then someone pushes a button, and that uploads into CalPADS. What I'm actually hearing is that there are systems that expanded learning programs use. It might be by a third-party provider, a community-based organization, CBO, or it could be something the district uses for their expanded learning. Make sure right now that you can verify that your system can upload your information into the student information system of the district. I recently heard from the CalPADS office that there was a vendor who was asking if they could just upload their stuff into CalPADS directly because their system was having trouble talking to the school district's student information system. Well, that would never be allowed, never be possible. So do the work now to make sure that your systems can talk to each other. I think that's what I want to emphasize, Heather. And
Thanks, Michael.
thank you.
All right, Iqbal and Teng, we're turning it over to you now to talk about audits, everyone's favorite topic.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone. My colleague Teng and I will be presenting a brief overview of the audits. And on one slide, we'll discuss the difference between an audits and FPM. And here we go. So the first thing we want to share with you that has already been discussed is that there are different kind of funding for the expanded learning programs in California. After school education safety elementary, for elementary and middle school, it's resource 6010. So we'll start talking in terms of numbers, slightly different from what was presented in earlier slides. An expanded learning opportunities program, ELOP, resource 2600. From the federal side, we get 21st century community learning centers for elementary and middle schools, as well as for high schools, all go in resource 4124. And the reason we discuss these resources are that although the CDE encourages that the expanded learning program should be run as a single comprehensive program, we would continue to encourage every LEA, community-based organization, to track their expenditures by these resources, because that is what the law requires. All these resources have different program requirements, and we would require that you track the expenditures, the revenue and the expenditures by these resources. Next slide, please. So emphasizing once again that you should track funding, since funding for each site is done separately, you should be tracking expenditures by funding source and also by the site itself. That is how we perform the FPMs and look at the compliance when we come into the field. ELOP is funded at the district level. And when an auditor comes to the district or a CDE employee comes to the district for ELOP review, they'll be reaching out first to the district and finding out where the programs are being operated to come and perform the compliance. Next, please. Teng, would you like to join me on this?
Yeah. So good morning, everyone. Teng Xiong with the Expanding Division. Again, these next couple of slides are essentially just ed code. If you really want to read through those ed code, this is just the audit education code that says that ACES programs, ELOP and 21st century programs are subject to the audit. So if you could forward through the next couple of slides. Same thing. The first one is ACES. They have to ACES and 21st century. They have to follow all fiscal reporting and auditing standards required by the CDE. Next slide, please. And this one just this is from the ELOP ed code. Again, just references the ed code that requires an audit. So that 41020. Next slide, please.
In many of the communication that we get from the field, whether it's an auditor or the LEA or the community-based organization, we find there is confusion between the federal program monitoring and the audits. So we want to be very clear that for an audit, the LEA governing board contracts with an external auditor who performs an audit and submits a copy of the audit report to the California Department of Education, State Controller's Office, and the respective county office of education. It is required by law that each LEA, including the charter schools, obtain an annual single audit and provide a copy to CDE. On the other hand, the federal program monitoring is not an audit. It is being conducted by the CDE consultant, and it's done annually, but it is based on cohorts, which means that not all the LEAs, not all the charter schools, not all the community-based organizations will be reviewed for FPM on an annual basis. They are done on a selective basis based on certain criteria, high-risk criteria, and they are also being done online and on-site, depending upon which cohort they are in. Thank. Next, please.
All right, and then Malia just put in the chat the link to this slide. So there is a local educational agency annual audits. It gives you, if you, this is just a snapshot of that page, but if you, there are tabs, if you see those green tabs on the bottom, there are tabs that give you information about, key dates of the audits, audit resources, compliance, how you should make your audit report, and then the last page, the last tab is the audit resolution process. Next slide, please. And then this is the audit guide. So this is the link to the Education Audit Appeals Panel, or EAP, which is located at the website. This has a copy of the K-12 audit guide, and which includes ACES and ELOP. So you can also see the if you scroll down, when you scroll down, you'll see the 25-26 audit guide that's going to happen this year. Well, it's going to happen in the fall of next year, but it's for 25-26. And then you can see as well previous audit guides as well. Next slide, please. And then what happens if I get a finding? Typically, this is for ELOP. Typically, the fiscal penalties or what we call apportionment significant findings. If you have any questions about that, please, contact PACE. And then the LEA audits, they'll give you a little bit more information about those. Any of the ELP programmatic findings, it'll be under the Expanding Learning Division Program Monitoring Office. And then, so that's for ELP. For ACEs, a little different. ACEs, you also get an audit on ACEs, and our PMO office will also work with you on the programmatic end. If you have a physical finding for your ACEs funding, we will be working with you on that as well. So just want to do a little clarification on that. Next slide, please. Iqbal.
Thank you, Teng. So our office is divided so that each region can be covered, and we are assigned with 5 EPCs in our office. However, 2 of the positions are vacant because of retirements and resignations, and we are currently in the process of hiring new staff. So meanwhile, for all questions regarding the FPMs or audit resolutions, please reach out to Lee Don for regions 1, 2, and 3. Region 4, 5, and 6, as well as region 11, you can reach out to me for any question, and I'll try to support you. Region 7 and 8, Teng, who's also presenting along with me, and regions 9 and 10, Man Fan from our office. Next, please.
And so one of the slides, I think they got moved, but so what happens after I resolve my findings? That's not the end, right? There is a regional support system, as Michael mentioned earlier, for your 21st century, your ACES 21st century assets and ELP funding. And this is kind of, we call it the system of support for expanded learning. And again, this is similar to the map that Michael provided that shows all of the regions in California. Next slide, please. And so the SSCL is kind of, in terms of the support, is divided into kind of two same team, but 2 different areas. So from CDE, you'll have a regional education programs consultant, or EPC, and then a fiscal analyst. And then at the county level, as Michael mentioned in his previous session, we contract out with county offices of education. There is a county lead or multiple county leads, especially for regions that have multiple county leads, and then there is a STEAM lead as well, and we call those local support. Next slide, please. And then there is a page. Again, this is a snapshot from our system of support contacts, right? So you have for each of the different regions, and also a breakdown for each of the counties that they cover. Again, shown in this one, Region 1 as Del Norte, Humboldt, Lake, Mendocino, Sonoma counties. So if you have any questions, please reach out to those folks. Next slide, please. And then, well, yeah, that was supposed to be in the front slide, but next slide, please. And so for your context, this is the link to the SSCL contacts, and I'll give a shout out to my Region 7 folks. For the EPC, you have Rosalind Clark and Susie Morikawa. For the fiscal analyst is Andrea Shoemate. Your county leads, Josh Blecker for Fresno County, Sheila Brooks for Merced and Mariposa counties, Virginia Cepeda for Tulare, Kings, and Madera counties. And your STEAM hubs, Sheila Brooks, Virginia, and TBD for Fresno. Next slide, please. And then resources. So if you don't know, the Expanded Learning Division has a list of resources that's available. You do have, this is again a snapshot of what our resource looks to our resources links on our webpage. Next slide, please. And then on that webpage, we have FAQs. You have the ACES 21st Century Assets Summer, which includes ACES 21st Century Assets and ELP FAQs. A couple of the links there includes our laws and policies, which provides guidance on any administrative and indirect costs, match requirements, and et cetera. And the next part, it's really important as well. Reporting forms. We have a link to our grants management database, and there is a reporting timeline. So if you don't know, or if you don't have what the timeline looks like for your ACES 21st Century and assets reporting, you can definitely check those out. That way, you should definitely put those either in an Outlook or set them as a date, and then, or just, save those the links to make sure that you understand when the timelines are happening. Next page, please. And then this is kind of when I was providing regional support, this is kind of like the way grantees and LEAs should be. You should kind of like be looking at your sequence of questions, right? If you're not sure about what is happening in your program, or what questions you have, check the FAQs. Those should be kind of like your first steps. Like, hey, I don't know, check your FAQs. Second part, check out or reach out to your other or nearby counties and LAs in your region. They may be able to provide you some responses that might help you, or might answer your questions. Next one, county leads. County leads are there. They're there to support you locally. Again, with the county leads and other and their support staff, they're there to support you. And then if when you contact your county lead and you can't, you guys still aren't sure, I would recommend reaching out to the consultant and or the fiscal analyst, just to make sure that you guys are on the same page. And so, yeah, again, this is just a high level information about the audits and the resources, and again, just your county leads. And so, thank you, and we'll see you in the breakout room. And I'll turn it to my colleagues, Jen Taylor and Lindsey Blomberg Johnson.
Thanks so much, Teng and Iqbal. Appreciate that. So as Heather mentioned earlier, Jen and I are going to talk a little bit today about the most recent additions and updates to the attendance recovery FAQs that are related to ELOP. So we did want to let you know that there have been a variety of revisions and new FAQs that have been added to all of the different topic areas on the landing page of the attendance recovery FAQs, which I have a feeling you're going to get that link dropped in the chat just shortly for you. So we do encourage you to check out all of the new additions and revisions, but today we're going to focus specifically on the ones that are related to ELOP. So we're going to go ahead and jump in on our next slide, please. We're going to start off with an FAQ that is related to wait lists. So this FAQ is number 4. If you're looking for it on the landing page, under the ELOP section, it is going to be number 4. It's brand new. So the question for this FAQ is, can an LEA that has students on a wait list for ELOP enroll students in an attendance recovery program that is supported with ELOP funds? So there's 2 parts to this answer. The first part is what we already know about wait lists and ELOP, and that is that the creation and implementation of a wait list for ELOP is a locally based decision if that LEA has met the requirements for offering and providing access for ELOP. So that's the first part. And the second part is that an LEA cannot bypass a student on the ELOP waitlist to enroll a student in attendance recovery that is not on the ELOP waitlist. So if you have an ELOP waitlist, you can then not skip students who are on that waitlist to enroll students into attendance recovery if those students are not also on the waitlist. So we hope this FAQ answers some of the questions we were getting about waitlists and how to manage an ELOP waitlist, as well as enrolling students into attendance recovery. And a side note on that, the FAQs we are going to go over today, they do address questions that were frequently coming up, and we will continue to develop FAQs as LEAs start running attendance recovery programs or continue to run them and there's gaps in guidance. That's what we hope to do with revisions and additional FAQs. So we'll go ahead and go to next slide, please, for our next one. So this one's related to supervision. It's going to be number 7 on the landing page if you're looking for it. And this one has some examples. So it looks like a lot, but the main question is, if an attendance recovery program must occur in a separate classroom from ELOP. So the answer is that statute doesn't preclude attendance recovery classrooms from having students present who are not participating in the attendance recovery program, as long as all conditions of apportionment are being met for attendance recovery. So it is a local decision if you want to have ELOP and attendance recovery programs offered in the same classroom. That decision should be based on the needs of the students, but it is a local decision if you want to do that. And then we have 3 different examples for you to be able to kind of visualize what that might look like if you do decide to have a classroom with both attendance recovery and ELOP students participating in their respective programs. So for the first example, we have a classified employee and a certificated employee of the LEA supervising a commingled group of up to 20 non-kindergarten students participating in ELO programming and up to 20 non-kindergarten students in attendance recovery, who those students are working on homework assignments and other content aligned to grade level standards. So what this example does is it shows us that we are in ratio for both programs. So we are in ratio of 1 staff member to up to 20 non-TK or K students, which is the ratio for both attendance recovery and ELOP. And it also shows us that the programs align to the supervision requirements of both programs. So you saw that we have a certificated employee of the LEA that is leading the supervision for our attendance recovery. And then we have a classified staff member, that is leading our attendance recovery program. So we have those requirements met for both programs. In example 2, we have a certificated employee of the LEA supervising a classroom where 10 non-kindergarten students are engaged in enrichment activities and 10 non-kindergarten or TK students are receiving instruction aligned to grade level standards. So again, we're in ratio. We have 1 staff member and we have 20 students. They're non-TK or K, so we're in that 1 to 20 ratio, so we're okay there. And then we see that we have a certificated employee of the LEA over both groups of students. So we're meeting the more stringent program requirement for supervision, which is certificated employee of the LEA for attendance recovery. So we're meeting the more stringent requirement, which is, you're probably familiar with ELOP, the more stringent requirement applies, and it does here as well. So for our last example for supervision, we have a classroom containing kindergartners. So we have our younger students in this one, where a certificated employee engages 10 students in enrichment activities and play, while another certificated employee of the LEA leads up to 10 students in academic content. So now we have our TK and K students. So we're in ratio of 1 to 10 for our younger kindergarten students, and we have proper supervision for the programs. And what I want to highlight in this example is that it's kind of lost in there, but this one is actually trying to highlight the nuance that we have 2 certificated employees in this example, but you see that only 1 certificated employee is highlighted as an employee of the LEA. And this is because a condition for attendance recovery is that the certificated employee supervising attendance recovery must be employed by the LEA. So you could have, in this example, the other certificated employee, maybe they are employed by a third-party provider for the ELO program, and that's why they're there. So that's what this one's trying to highlight, but it is kind of nuanced. So want to put that out there. In this example, you could also have a certificated employee of the LEA and doing the attendance recovery in the 1 to 10 ratio. And then you could also have a classified staff member 1 to 10 ratio for ELOP. So there's a variety of ways that you could structure this, but we were hoping this FAQ just gives you a little bit of visualizing of what it could look like. So we'll go ahead and move on to our next FAQ. So FAQ, this one's number 10, and it's related to instructional content. And to set the stage a little bit first about what this one is specifically trying to address, it is specifically trying to talk about questions we received about the 9 hours of operation for ELOP, so the requirement of 9 hours of programming that is required specifically during the 30 non-school days of programming. So that's kind of where this one's coming from, kind of set the stage for you. So the question then is whether or not a school district can offer 4 hours of attendance recovery supervised by certificated employees of the LEA, followed by 5 hours of ELOP supervised by either certificated or classified staff. So the answer is no. This offering does not provide attendance recovery as a voluntary option for students and would not meet the ELOP minimum time requirement for a non-school day. Attendance recovery hours do not count towards meeting the statutory requirement for the required daily length of ELO programming. And as a reminder, it's the intent of the legislature that attendance recovery programs do not negatively impact the implementation of expanded learning. And again, you've heard us say this if you were at the Spring Academy. We said it quite a bit. Attendance recovery is not mandatory, it's not compulsory, and students who are concurrently participating in both ELOP and attendance recovery have to retain the ability to participate in either program. So the example I want to give related to kind of the setting of the stage is that, okay, it's summertime. And part of the 30 days of non-school programming, an LEA wants to offer 4 hours in the morning of attendance recovery. And then in the afternoon, they want to offer 5 hours of ELOP. And they're like, cool, that's 9 hours. I should be good. And this would not be an acceptable scheduling scenario because, as we mentioned, attendance recovery cannot count towards the required ELOP 9 hours. So that's what this LEA would be doing. And that's in that example. In the 9 hours, 4 of those would be attendance recovery. It can't work that way. And then it also does not give the students an option in the morning other than to be in attendance recovery. So attendance recovery wouldn't be voluntary in that scenario if there's nothing else that they can choose to participate in terms of ELOP activities. So 2 reasons why it would not be acceptable. And hopefully that makes it a little bit more clear when you are thinking through scheduling options. And it kind of hits home the running concurrently requirement. So 2 things running concurrently at the same time. Jen, I think we want to add a little bit about Saturday school because that also comes into play when you're thinking about programming on non-school days.
No, thanks, Lindsay. Hi, everybody. It's good to be back. So attendance recovery and Saturday school are completely separate. Saturday school is something that it remains unchanged with attendance recovery. It's a complete separate section of education code. It's actually section 37223. If you want to go look at it and look at those elements, if you're curious and want to kind of look at those pieces, but it is a complete separate kind of program. And it's, really there's elements of mandatory and truancy. So we just wanted to make that pretty clear because that's come up quite a bit. Like, oh, we're doing Saturday school over here, but attendance recovery is completely separate. Another thing too, before we get into the next slide around fees, just want to mention that attendance recovery, it can be for any student. We've been hearing a lot about, only chronically absent or different elements. It doesn't, yes, students that are chronically absent that would definitely benefit, and that's the intention, right? To increase access and to instruction and content, but it can be for any student. So just putting that out there as well as you kind of go in and, look at this as an opportunity. It's once again, it's a choice. You may use ELOP for attendance recovery. And so let's talk a little bit about the next pieces. As Lindsay had mentioned, we've gotten all these FAQs are all questions that we've received or the system of support for expanded learning received. And so we brought it back to our teams, our attendance recovery kind of statewide work group. And so we got a lot of questions around fees, like what happens when, if that, So first starting out, can an LEA charge a fee in order, for a student to participate in attendance recovery? And the answer is no. In general, you cannot charge a fee for educational activities, just like for school, you can't, charge for school. And so this would also apply to the attendance recovery time. So now we know with ELOP, this is, kind of gets into an interesting dynamic, right? Because in statute, it does talk about fees. So we'll get to that, but let's first start to the next part around attendance recovery and ELOP. So can a student be charged a fee for ELOP on a day in which they participate in AR? Well, they're an ELOP and they're an AR, and according to this, no, they cannot, because they are participating in both. And so if they're participating in AR, they cannot be charged for ELOP on that particular day. So those are kind of the framework elements. But then, kind of goes into the question, well, if AR is not offered on that day. So this brings us to the next slide here. So can a student be charged a fee for ELOP on a day in which they do not participate in AR? And the answer is yes. So if they're not participating in AR, they are, going to ELOP. But there is a however. As you know, in statute for ELOP, students that are, foster youth or homeless or qualify for free and reduced price meals cannot be charged a fee. So that's a big piece. The second piece is, that if you do charge, fees, it has to be on family fees, it has to be charged on a sliding scale. And based on the needs of the family and ability to pay. So really taking those elements into account as you develop that schedule. And then kind of the third step of that is, families can self-certify. They can self-certify the needs. LEA does not have to confirm information with families. And then the fourth step of that, kind of the substep of that, is if you do collect fees, you want to make sure you're tracking and maintaining accurate records of the fees, making sure that it's going back into program activities and services to students for the expanded learning program. So those are some of the key elements as you are doing all these considerations, as you're kind of moving along and working with AR and ELOP. These particular FAQs are under the attendance recovery and ELOP section tab of the FAQ. And the ones that Lindsey also mentioned too are within that tab on the attendance recovery page. The fee ones are FAQs 14, 15, and 16. Although that numbering is subject to change, as we add and add new elements. But we do have that on there. There are other FAQs that were updated related to our teams, our school fiscal teams, or our attendance counting teams. So just noting that too, that you might want to go through and kind of glance at the other FAQs. So, and I see the QR code on there as well. So that links you to the updated ones. And then if you have questions, so if you have questions to particular, in particular areas or topics, on the next slide, you'll see there's a lot of different questions we've been receiving around attendance or generating ADA and different elements. So you want to make sure that you get it to the right group. Attendance recovery it's complex. There's a lot of different elements. Whenever we receive questions too related to ADA or attendance, we also loop in these teams because we want to make sure that we're providing the right response. So kind of what we're doing at the state level, we're collaborating with, attendance accounting, our school fiscal services team, CALPADS team, our educational options team, which developed the attendance recovery guidance. You might want to do that too with your teams. Connect with your CALPADS team, connect with your attendance accounting, connect, with your curriculum and instruction team if you're, doing attendance recovery. Another element too, technology, the student information systems. So you want to make sure that you connect with all these teams going forward. We do have the emails on here if you have any follow-up questions as well. And so, did I miss anything, Lindsey? I want to make sure before we pass it to Melissa.
No, I think you covered it. We do just want to invite you to the breakout room later where we will be highlighting an LEA who has begun running an attendance recovery program and sharing some thoughts and practices that they have. So if that's of interest to you, we'd love to see you in the breakout room.
All right. Thank you. That concludes the presentation part of today's workshop. I just want to say special shout out to Michael Funk, Heather Williams, Teng, Iqbal, Lindsey, Jen. Thank you all for your support and facilitating today's workshop. I think we have got to all of the questions in the chat. And as Lindsey and Jen mentioned, jumping into the breakout rooms is also a great opportunity if you have any of those questions, and also attending our expanded learning office hours. That's also a great place to go if you have more of those in the weeds questions. And so thank you again to all of our presenters today for the wonderful content. Slides will be updated and everyone should have that available in the learning guide and will be shared within 24 hours. So a few slides before we open up breakout rooms. This has been elevated throughout the presentation, but again, wanting to share how you can connect with the system of support for expanded learning. So you can scan this QR code. The bit.ly is also linked in the learning guide. As you can tell, we really want you to connect with these folks. They're a great source of information, resource support, etc. So you certainly want to stay connected with your SSEL team. If you are not following CAN, I know earlier Heather had mentioned signing up for the policy newsletter and updates. That's a great place to stay connected with policy specific content. But you can also follow us on social media on all the channels. And so if you scan this QR code, you can stay connected with the California After School Network. And this is our 25-26 expanded learning statewide TA technical assistance events that are happening throughout the calendar year. And so you can scan this QR code. We'll drop the bit.ly in the chat and add it to the learning guide. But this just has like an overview of today's or this season's academy, all of our office hours, as well as saving the date for the spring 2026 Expanded Learning Academy. So you can stay connected with all of the events that are happening this year to support our expanded learning community. And before we jump into the breakout rooms, we encourage you to complete our feedback form. This is for today's workshop, and your voice is important, and also hearing what was helpful today, what would you like to learn more about, what are some topics that you might want to see at our Spring Academy that's offered in April 2026. And so this should take maybe 5 to 6 minutes, and it's also linked in our learning guide, but highly encourage you as we really walk continuous quality improvement, giving us your feedback on how to enhance the Academy experience for you all. Okay, so in a moment, we are going to open up breakout rooms, and just wanted to share, here are the breakout rooms. This is kind of like a choose your own adventure. And so you're not assigned to a breakout room. You can just choose which room you would like to attend and jump into. If you would like to connect with Heather and Michael on a little more technical questions on the content that they presented today, you can join them in room 1. You can join Malia Meyer in room 2 that will focus on quality expanded learning opportunities. In room 3, Malia and Leslie from the CAN team will focus on policy and all the things, all the in the weeds of policy content. And so you can join them in room 3. Room 4, Jen and Lindsey will be supporting folks with attendance recovery. So if you had some of those questions and you want to connect a little bit deeper on that, you can join room 4. Room 5, Iqbal and Teng will be joining that space to chat a little bit more about audits. And then if you just want to share, if you want to connect, none of those other topics maybe say something to you and you just want to join and connect with other folks that are in our expanded learning community. Maybe you want to share an idea or a promising practice, or maybe a consideration to consider for our next academies. You can join Jeff Davis and Danielle Prince from the CAN team in room 6. And for folks that may be new to using Zoom breakouts, before we open up the spaces, there are 3 different ways that you can join a breakout room. So in your Zoom window, you can scroll to the bottom and look for this breakout room, looks like a tile box, and you can click on that. This pop-up window should then pop up, and the rooms, once they are open, will be listed here. And then you can just scroll over to the right where it says join and click to join on that room. Since everyone will be joining a breakout, or hopefully everyone will be joining a breakout in a moment, it may take a few moments to get into a space, so we appreciate your patience. If this way to joining a breakout room does not work for you, you can also rename yourself. And so if you scroll to the top right of your corner, click on the 3 dots, and or if you go into the participants list on the right side of the Zoom window, you can hover over your name and just rename yourself, and rename yourself with the room that you would like to join, and we will drop you into that space. And if none of those work, you could also just hang out and come off mute and let us know what room you want to get to. So I'm going to go back to this slide so that way y'all can see what rooms are available. And if we can open up the breakout rooms now, looks like they're open. And the Zoom will close at 12 p.m. in the breakout room, so you will not need to come back to this space. And we encourage you to attend our second workshop on Thursday, on this Thursday, September 18th. Enjoy your time in breakouts, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for attending today.